Welcome to the Growing Tall Poppies podcast. I'm your host, Dr Nat Green, and I'm so excited to have you join me as we discuss what it means to navigate your way through post-traumatic growth and not just survive, but to thrive after trauma. Through our podcast, we will explore ways for you to create a life filled with greater purpose, self-awareness, and a deep inner peace. Through integrating the many years of knowledge and professional experience, as well as the wisdom of those who have experienced trauma firsthand, we will combine psychology, accelerated approaches, coaching, and personal experience to assist you to learn, to grow, and to thrive. I hope to empower you to create deeper awareness and understanding and stronger connections with yourself and with others, whilst also paving the way for those who have experienced trauma and adversity to reduce their suffering and become the very best versions of themselves in order to thrive. Thank you so much for joining me on today's episode. I'm really honoured today to bring you our next guest on the Growing Tall Poppies podcast. It's my pleasure and privilege to welcome a wonderful lady who I met just a few months ago. And boy, does she have a story to share with us and is making huge difference and impact in the world. I'm so pleased to introduce Jenny Steadman to you all. Jenny is a company director, leadership consultant, mother, wife, keynote speaker, and meditation teacher. Her life journey also includes navigating the challenges as a victim survivor of childhood sexual abuse. She founded the Wisdom of Survivors project, gathering stories and insights from those who have made significant progress in their healing to support those in need. And she is also the co-national director of Potential Project Australia, which is a global company on a mission to create a more human world of work. So welcome, Jenny. It's so great to have you here.
Thank you for inviting me to be part of your show. I really appreciate it.
Oh, I feel so honoured to have you willing to come on and share your story. And I know you've been doing some amazing things, and we'll get into that as we go through. So can we just start with you giving us a brief introduction of who you are and what you do in the world?
Sure. So, yes, Jenny Steadman. I live in the Blue Mountains outside of Sydney. And the work that I do in the world is as the co-national director for Potential Project here in Australia. We're an organisation whose mission is, as you said, to create a more human world of work. So we do a lot of work with leadership teams in everything from large multinational companies through to very small local organisations, though predominantly our work is within the sort of middle to larger size organisations. And the work we do is really to support leadership teams primarily and teams more holistically to have the mindset of bringing in wisdom, compassion and awareness into the work that we do about making a more human world of work. We do it in all sorts of ways, but a lot around the mindset of leadership.
Such a huge area of need, isn't it? Because if we don't have good leaders in our workplaces or just in the world in general, then we're in all sorts of trouble, aren't we?
Oh, for sure. And what we say as well, like the fundamental premise is that leadership begins with ourselves. We need to understand and lead ourselves first of all, which is where this awareness is really, really important. And then from that, we're in a better place to then understand and lead others within our teams or within our organisation or within our ecosystem, including suppliers, etc. So, yeah, very, very necessary. But as well, we need to, that's where the compassion comes into it, being able to do the hard things of being a leader, but doing it in a human way. And that requires a large degree of wisdom as well.
Oh, yes, definitely. Undoubtedly, so much wisdom. And compassion is so important in anything that we do, but particularly in that type of work as you're developing really strong, professional, wonderful leaders.
Yeah, that's right. And compassion doesn't mean that it's soft or that we become a doormat or anything like that. It is very much about being able to make the hard decisions and have those difficult, courageous conversations, but it can be done in a way with care and in a way that brings about the best for the people involved. So that's what I do work-wise. And of course, there are other things that I do as well. I'm a mum to two wonderful teenagers and a wife. And then I have my desire to support people who've experienced sexual violence as well. And so I'm doing bits and pieces within that area as well. And we can talk about that.
Yes. And that is particularly going to be the focus today. And I'm very grateful that you agreed to come on here and share your story, because it really is such an amazing, courageous story, and one that I believe so strongly in that needs to be heard. So yeah, so
Thank you.
let's start with, if you feel up to it, share as much or as little as you would like to. As you know, my guest interviews were around speaking with people who've experienced trauma.
Mhm.
And we've already talked about you having experienced childhood sexual abuse when I did the introduction. So if you could share a little bit of your story, that would be great.
Sure. Well, I first experienced child sexual abuse when I was 11 years old. So when I was 11, I was on a music trip with a brass band that I played in, traveling from the Blue Mountains where I lived to regional New South Wales. And on this band trip, I stayed with a host family. I didn't know anyone in that family. And as you can imagine, Nat, that was such an exciting time for me, traveling with friends from my band and looking forward to meeting and performing with new people. I was so happy to be on that trip. I remember being delighted to be heading off on this, really what was quite an adventure. It was someone from that host family who first sexually assaulted me. And the way I describe it is that in one terrifying night, my innocence was stolen from me. It just felt like never again would I have that level of innocence. And you see, this was an ordeal that I didn't even know existed before that, let alone anything I could ever imagine happening to me or others. But it did happen to me, and because of that experience and then what's happened beyond that as well, it's so important to me that I do all that I can to help prevent that from occurring to others, and as well to help alleviate the suffering of those who've also experienced it. So that was an absolutely terrifying experience. The unfortunate thing, of course, is that it happened again. So a few years after that, I was raped by a different person in a completely different setting. And it was as though I had learned my response, because after that first one, despite being threatened not to talk about it, I told my parents after it happened.
Wow,
And
that's such a brave, brave thing to do, because as you said, Jen, back then we didn't know anything about it. It wasn't talked about. It was very
yeah,
much, if it did happen, it was swept under the carpet and you didn't discuss it. So for you to speak up back then as an 11-year-old girl,
mm,
yeah.
mm.
So then what happened after
Well,
that?
well, and one of the reasons I did was through ignorance of how the body worked, I guess. And so I was still quite young and hadn't yet started getting my period. And I was of this view that because I didn't know any better, that at some point I'm going to get my period. And then because of what happened, I would then immediately fall pregnant, as though there was all of this stuff going around inside of me that was then
Mm,
going to cause me to get pregnant. And I was just so scared about that. So I knew that I needed to tell my parents. And of course, I learned through that, well, that's not going to happen. But we kept it quiet and we didn't ever discuss it again. So I told them, but we didn't ever discuss it again.
Mm.
And I can only imagine that this is because of, yeah, it's such stigma attached to something like that. And as well, early 1980s, it was just not the thing to talk about it back then.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So when it happened to me a second time, I had learned my response. I knew that I mustn't talk about it and that I should be quiet. And so then I just, in silence, privately attempted to, the way I describe it is just to privately patch myself together and to be
Mm.
stoic. That was something that was probably important back in that day and age. I'm making it sound like it was ancient history. It
Like
wasn't
we're old
that long
dinosaurs.
ago. Yeah,
But
exactly.
not that long ago, really, but
No,
that's how it was. It was very
yeah,
much kept quiet.
yeah.
And as you said, you had learned your response. We do
Yes,
what we know and what feels comfortable and safe.
yeah, yeah, that's right. And so after that, and for such a long time after that, I did all I could just to ignore the reality of what happened to me and push the pain down under the surface, just keeping it as hidden as I possibly could so I could just try and get on with my life.
Yeah. So if you think back to then, when you were just repressing everything, not sharing what had happened, and just pushing all that down and continuing on as best as you could, what do you think other people saw? Did they see any change in you, or things were just normal from their perspective?
It's really hard to know in those months, and I'll say months because about, uh, let me get my maths right here, I think about 7 months after that, I got a music scholarship to study in Sydney.
Okay.
And so I left home and started living on my own, even though I hadn't finished school. I was going into year 11. So I did all of year 11 and year 12 while I was living on my own.
Very young to
It,
be
and that's,
independent and living on your own, as well
yeah.
as carrying that massive burden yourself.
And that's perhaps something that we could talk about as well, because it was very young. So that what that meant then was that I was mostly well away from everybody in my life who knew me beforehand.
Mm.
What I did experience a lot in those months was nightmares, like absolute terror-filled nightmares. Whether people could see that or not, I don't know. But I think because music was such a big part of my life, what I did do after it happened and before I left home was just throw myself into my music very, very much. And
Mm.
therefore, it might have been easier to hide what was actually going on because that music was my the place where I could spend hours and hours and people wouldn't question it. So I could spend hours every day playing the piano and people wouldn't question it. And I also played brass instruments as well, so I could do that too. And I had performances and things like that, so I could very much hide myself behind all of that. And then I left home, so I was away from everyone. I was away from family. I was away from the friends who I had a completely new start to my life. Entering into year 11, I was still 15, heading into 16 then. But yeah, it was probably much harder then for people to see what was going on for me.
Absolutely. So, really, a great strategy without you deliberately doing a strategy was to isolate yourself from the people who knew you so you could hide that even more and start afresh, ultimately at a new place, at a new school, and throw yourself into your music using the
Yeah.
scholarship.
I
Yeah.
would never have thought of myself as having isolated myself. I think it's just in the way that we're having this conversation here. I'm just trying to think, what would they have seen? Well, it would have been harder for people to see things.
Mm.
Mm, it, I guess it could be described as isolated, but I never really thought of it like that. And then the choice wasn't necessarily my own to be so far away from the family, but that's the way that it worked out.
Yeah, and it was a wonderful opportunity to take up this scholarship you'd obviously worked very hard for and had won.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, it
I
wasn't an
didn't
opportunity.
want that to sound isolated as in a negative thing. It was more a strategy of you really were doing it on your own and being
Yeah.
brave and moving forward
Mm,
in the
mm.
really helpful, positive way for you, but it also helped serve to shut that part of you down that
Yeah.
people may have been able to see
Yeah.
if
Yeah.
you'd
That's
been
right.
able to
That's right.
stay where
Yeah.
you were. Yeah.
Yeah.
So what do you think the next big turning point for you was? So you threw yourself into year 11 and 12.
So I think that's actually worth talking about, that period of time, because I grew up as the youngest of 6 children, and I had lived in a reasonably large household, although the elder two had left home, and I was actually, when I was born, the eldest one did, and then the second eldest not that many years
Mm-hmm.
afterwards. So I wasn't necessarily growing up in a really big household, but my parents and my grandmother were there as well. And I that time of leaving home and then suddenly and very suddenly living on my own was an extraordinarily difficult time of life for me. So I think that's worth just mentioning, because when I went into that period of time, I, excuse me, I was still, and still to this day, actually suffer these awful nightmares. But back then, I was having these nightmares pretty much every single night. And so I was absolutely terrified at that point in my life, absolutely terrified for my safety.
Mm.
And I was then living in this little unit, this 1 bedroom unit that it didn't have any like safety door down at the street level or anything like that. So I would be in my unit at night and bawling my eyes out. I would cry myself so desperately, like, just I can't describe just how this flood of tears every night, because I was so lonely. I didn't know what had hit me with being in this, in
Mm.
like the suburbs, in the city, going to a new school that had a very different demographic to the school that I went to before that. I didn't know how to speak to these people who turned up to school in gold Rolls Royces and Mercedes and
Oh
things
my
like that.
goodness.
It's just like they were completely different type of demographic to me.
Mm.
And so I was so desperately lonely. But what I would also do is just look at my door and see that little chain that went from the door frame onto the door itself, and just beg, like, whoever, whatever might be listening, just pleading, please keep me safe. Please keep me
Mm.
safe. Like, I was just hoping that that chain, if someone could somehow unlock the actual lock of the door, at least that chain might have been able to keep me safe.
Mm.
And so for months, it was like that. I would just cry. I was so lonely. I would look at the phone and just beg the phone to ring. Would someone please call me? I'm so lonely. And
Terrifying time for
it
you.
was a really, really, really tough time. And
Mm.
then just trying to turn up to this new school. Plus, I had so many music commitments as well. I had the commitments of music at the school, but I had external band and orchestra rehearsals, and needing to figure out how to get myself around on public transport in a transport system that I didn't understand, and having to learn to cook and clean and all of that. So, and this was immediately off the back of what had been a really terrifying experience in itself, experiences. Mm.
So when you look back now, obviously with the benefit of hindsight, with such a huge transition happening anyway, but at a time where you'd experienced one of the worst periods of your life, what do you think, what would be a powerful milestone that really stands out for you as far as moving on with dealing with the trauma of that?
Absolutely. The thing that stands out for me was that there was a teacher at the school. She was part of the executive team. She didn't necessarily do teaching herself,
Hmm.
but she was part of the executive team. To be honest, I can't recall anymore exactly what her role was, but she offered meditation to the senior students. And she just guided this meditation practice herself and offered it to the senior students.
Mm-hmm.
It may have been for both year 11 and year 12, and I can't recall which of those 2 years I took it up, but I did take it up.
Mm-hmm.
And that was something that actually made a really big difference for me. So that was the beginning of my involvement in mindfulness and meditation. And I recall very strongly what it helped me to do was to find a place of calm inside of me. And that helped me to get like a little bit of an oasis, a safe place in a way. I felt just more of a sense of groundedness and calm and balance. So that actually was a really significant milestone for me. And then going back, however many years ago it was now, we had our 30-year school reunion.
Gosh.
And this teacher was at that, which absolutely surprised me because when I was at school, I thought she was ancient back then. Yet another 30 years went past and she was
She's
still
still
there.
ancient.
But it gave me the opportunity to say to her, thank you. Thank you for introducing me to meditation. It's still something that's a very, very big part of my life. And I'm so grateful that I did get that chance to say thank you to her.
Isn't that powerful that you were able to give her the gift of knowing how important a role she played, even though she probably thought, oh, but I just did this.
Yeah.
You were able to share for her how important that was for you and your journey and still in your life now.
Yeah. Yeah. It's still a very big part of my life right now. And it continued to be with some ups and downs. Sometimes it featured a lot more in my life, and other times it was more in the background. But ever since then, right through to now, it's been there. Mm.
So, did you want to share a little bit about the meditation and how that works for you so that if some of our listeners are thinking, oh, I've got all this stuff going on and I really need a way to quiet my mind or to calm my nervous system, they can find out a bit more about it.
Yeah, sure. So for me, meditation is not for me about clearing my mind of thoughts. Like I actually don't know anyone who can genuinely do that. And I go on annual 10-day silent meditation retreats, and the teachers at these retreats are people who have been on years long, like they've been meditating but on silent retreats that have gone for months and months, and combined they've been on years of silent meditation retreat, and they say that it's not possible for them to clear their mind of thoughts as well. What it is more about is to get in relationship with our thoughts, to understand what it is that we're thinking. So it's helpful for me to notice when my mind is going down a path of worry or catastrophizing or just plain old distraction or whatever it might be. And I can just observe that. And then when I'm ready, bring my attention back to the thing that I have chosen as the object for my awareness. That might be my breath, or it might be while I'm swimming, it's my hands entering the water, or watching my arm raise as I turn my head to take a breath while I'm swimming. Or it might be walking meditation. The object of my awareness is placing my feet on the ground each time I take a step, whatever it might be. But all of that enables me to be understanding of how my mind works. What am I thinking? What am I assuming to be true? But it's also not just about having my mind on one particular object. At times, it's just about being aware of whatever might be happening in this particular moment, whether that's sounds or sights or body sensations or whatever it might be. But I also like to do meditation where I wish other people well. And that has helped me a lot when I'm going through difficult times, as I did when the trial occurred last year. And I know we haven't even talked about that yet, but there was eventually a criminal trial. But what I would do each morning through that was to, inside of myself, just to calm myself and then to wish people well. That included every person I knew was going to be there in the courtroom and beyond that too. So to get back to your original question, the practice of meditation is helpful for me in so many different ways, and it's not a strict form of it must be done XYZ way.
I
There's quite
love that you've
flexibility.
shared that with us, because I hear that when we've talked about meditation and yoga and things like that for calming our nervous system and regulating our nervous system with various guests. I've had people reach out to me and between episodes saying, "Oh, but I just can't ever quiet my mind." So I'm so pleased that you were able to share that with us, because, well, I can certainly say that my mind never switches off and it's never quiet. So it's lovely to have you validate that for our listeners, that it's not about quieting our mind, it's about focusing our attention and having that awareness.
Yeah, and it's about understanding our mind. And the thing is, our mind is designed to think, just like our eyes to see and our ears to hear. So to try and that would be like saying eyes don't see, ears don't hear,
Mm,
mind don't think. Well, no, that's probably not going to be possible. But it's sometimes it feels a bit like, to me, it's like a radio playing in the background, and I can just turn down the volume a little bit while I bring into the foreground things like the awareness of my breath or whatever it is that I'm choosing to do in my particular practice.
that's fabulous. Thank you. And I know, as I said, that will be of great benefit. Now, I know everyone has just heard you then talk about the trial, and let's go back to, you moved beyond school and you mentioned how important some certain people like the teacher was in helping you move beyond things. Let's go through some of the other main turning points for you that have led to where you are now.
Well, throughout those years, I did quite a lot of personal development and self awareness trainings, courses, books.
Mm-hmm.
I had counselling. All of that made a difference. I've been a long term journal writer as well. That always helps. But I think it's throughout all of that, particularly with the courses and the willingness when the time was right to start discussing it with friends. It's the connection, just having connection with people. And through that process, understanding that we're not alone, that there's actually so many people who care. And
Mm.
as well, there's suffering in all sorts of, like, everyone experiences suffering, but sadly, very many and too many way. One is too many, but so many people experience sexual violence as well. So though we may feel like we're alone, we're not alone. And that's actually, it's terrible that there are so many people who've experienced this. So for me, connecting with people and having that willingness to look at the darkness as well.
Mm.
Like, I actually did hide it for a very long time.
Yeah.
But after I had my children and after I had my daughter, it could no longer be hidden. It could no longer be something that I could not pay attention to. It just, not that I had ever forgotten. I remembered it all as though those horrendous moments were frozen in time. I remembered it all
Mm.
extremely clearly. But it was though it just came back to me with the weight of, as though it was completely fresh in a way. And it was really hard to deal with then. So that's when I reached out to have some very specific counseling around that. And that helped me a lot as well. But I had to work through the rage because I did experience an absolute overwhelming rage for quite a period of time there until I could get to the place of being able to deal with it in a way that led me to how I am today.
And I think that's really important for everyone who's listening to know that, of course, we're going to be angry. You go through something like this and you're not able to share it and you've had to stay silent for so long and move forward. It had to come out somehow. And to recognize that and do all your own personal development and do everything you could. And then eventually, still, despite all of that, know that there's more. I need to get it out and seek
Yeah.
help. is a huge, huge thing for you to do.
Yeah, yeah. And before we kind of move on from that, I think the other thing that I would like to mention, and this doesn't get much sort of airtime from people, I think, because perhaps it's not considered to be all that traumatic compared to other things or whatever the reason might be. But I want to mention as well how damaging it is just to have harassment. And
Oh,
so I
yes.
moved to London when I was 19, not just a few months before I turned 20. And during those 3 years that I lived in London, I experienced so much what's often, well, it's not often because it's not often talked about, but when it is, it's referred to as street harassment that you get in the street. And I experienced such a vast amount of that when I lived in London. And it was, in most cases, relatively harmless. Like I didn't experience any violence that I needed to do anything about.
Mhm.
But it was just an ever constant presence of danger. And I thought I was kind of alone with that until I read a book only maybe 4 or 5 years ago called Misogynation. And
Misogynation.
misogynation, and that's talking about sexist behavior in all sorts of different ways, but it talked about street harassment. And suddenly I was reading something from someone who was putting in words exactly what I had experienced, this constant feeling of just, I needed to be constantly on alert. I needed to have a
Mhm.
360-degree awareness of what was going on around me, because the number of times that I got followed home or I got harassed on the street. And it always had a sexual sort of undertone to it, that I got followed, that it happened in so many ways. And sometimes it was quite confronting, where I needed to actually lie to these people to say that I didn't live in this house that they had just followed me to, that I would give them a number that wasn't my number, that they would threaten me if I was giving them incorrect information. It was really scary. I had to change my personality. And those experiences are actually something that has stayed embedded inside me now as a form of fear of being just unsafe in the world, feeling like the
Mhm.
world is an unsafe place to be, even though this is now decades on. And it happened when I returned to Australia as well, but nothing like what it did during my few years of living in London.
So
So
glad you've shone a light on that, because it's not something that I've heard referred to in that way. And I think that most females in particular, but not just females, definitely can happen to anyone, that would be able to recognize, whether it be us walking alone at night of an evening or in broad daylight in some
mm,
locations. That now makes a lot of sense.
yeah, yeah, that's right. And it could be, for me, it happened daylight, it happened at nighttime, all of that. And in preparation for, and I know we haven't talked about this yet, but the TEDx talk that I just gave last week, I watched other TED talks or TEDx talks, either way, about people who'd experienced sexual violence. And there was a talk by, and I hope I'm going to get her name correctly, Ione Wells, spelled Ione,
Mm-hmm.
but I think the female version of it is pronounced Ione. And she talked about when she lived in London and she got off her bus and someone who was on the bus followed her home, and then she got a horrendous attack. But again, it was like that first bit of that happened to me so many times, where I would catch my bus and I would get off my bus and I would walk home and someone would follow me. And I would get to the point of hearing the footsteps and I would know that there was someone there, and I would duck into a shop and then I'd pretend to do something in the shop, like gather a few things, go to the counter and then say, oh, I've changed my mind, I'm ducking out. And this person would go around the shop and then duck and then immediately follow me out. And I just feel like what I heard her talk about in her TED talk was, other than the fact that hers just ended up being horrendous, but that was exactly what I was experiencing as well. And all of that is something that's significant as well.
Absolutely. And I know that's part of your bigger mission is
Mm.
to shine a light on this and break the silence on sexual violence and really bring that into people's awareness so people talk about it and we stop it from continuing in the way that it is.
Yeah, we want it to be prevented.
Absolutely. So I know that that's certainly not the end of your story, and I know you've gone on to do some even braver things. Did you want to share a bit more about that?
Which braver things are you
Oh,
referring to?
which, yes, there's many of them. So let's look at when you did break the silence and you spoke up about that offender that.
So I thought for years that my story was over, that I could live with it, that I could just, like, it's done, I could live with it. But I couldn't just live with it. I felt like there was still more that I needed to do. And so I did decide to go to the police, and that's challenging in itself because you have to give a second by second description of everything that happened. So that took some time. But by then, like, I was in very much a strong place. I could talk about this. I could hear the questions. I could answer the questions. I could hear the questions, and I could hear the thoughts in my head and the constriction of the body sensations. And through the training that I've had, particularly through meditation, I could learn to let go of the worry thoughts in my head, and I could soften and soothe the tightness of the body sensations. So therefore I could answer the questions. So I felt like I was in a pretty good place to be able to do that. Mind you, it was years, and this was nearly 40 years after this had happened to me. So I'd had a long time to work on myself by that stage.
Mm.
So yes, I did report to the police, and I've got to say as well, and I know this isn't everybody's experiences, and at no point would I suggest that what I did should be what others do, or that others will get an outcome that looks like mine, or that anyone should feel what I feel. We're all different. But for me, from the moment I started telling the police, the detective, as challenging as it was, I started to feel a weight lift off my shoulders, a weight that I didn't even realize was there to the degree that it was. But it was only when it started to lift off my shoulders did I realize just actually how heavy it had been. And the reason why it started to lift off my shoulders was because I felt like I had finally told somebody who could actually do something about it. I don't know what it was going to lead to, but I had trust that something was going to happen.
Mm.
Even if it was no end result, at least something was happening in that it was being given due credibility. He believed me, this detective. And I was just so blown away by that the police force was prepared to invest in his time and the time of all of the other people who were investigating this as well. And I know there were others involved with it. I was so impressed that the police were prepared to invest the time and the money and the resources into investigating something that had happened decades earlier.
Mm. Yeah, there's a lot of layers in that really there's this whole, it's never too late, that you've waited 40 years.
Yeah.
And even though you thought you got on with your life and you were coping, you still knew deep down that it was still there. And
Yes.
until you gave it a voice and it spoke about it to someone, you weren't able to really start that letting go process fully, were you?
Mm, that's right. Yeah.
And to be
It,
believed,
yeah. Yeah.
huge, huge thing.
To be believed. And yet he also had to, this might not be the way that he described it, but that he would describe it, but in so many ways he had to be skeptical as well. So by that, he had to ask me all sorts of, well, skeptical isn't quite the right word, but he had to be so thorough that he had to ask all kinds of different questions. And And I just saw that as part of the process. But it was through that he took me for my word. But then he had to go out and investigate, and he had to speak to a whole lot of other people, and that all helped, I guess, for it to be consolidated within his mind, within the records of the police and then the Department of Public Prosecutions, that there was a genuine case here.
And yeah, for anyone who's listening who might have been through similar, who's thinking, oh, maybe I will go to the police, it really is not a simple process. It's painful, it's challenging, but you can get through it and feel better just from having shared your story, regardless of the outcome. That's what it was like for you and for many people that I know.
Yeah, that's what it was like for me. And I know other people don't have an experience necessarily that was as positive as what I had, and for some, not positive at all. I am very lucky that the detective who was assigned to me was an amazing person. And yeah, very lucky.
So, how long between when you gave your story and when he did all his investigation and his team investigated it before the next step of the process started to happen where charges were laid?
So charges were laid. I can't recall the exact number of months after when I first reported, but probably within 8 months, I would say. The investigation felt like it was going on for a long time, and it felt like there were large gaps where I wasn't sure where things were up to. Not, I wasn't expecting to be told. It was just, when you think about this for almost every second of every day, a day can feel like a long period of time.
Yes.
So what this whole process really called upon within me was the ability to be patient, because it's completely out of my hands. There's nothing I could do about it. I had to learn to be with the discomfort of not being in control of it and not knowing exactly what was happening. And I didn't need to know what was happening, because it was no longer me to be the one to have to try to control. So then it took, and then so charges were laid within probably about 8 months. And then it went into the whole Department of Public Prosecutions process. And at some point after that, maybe about 14 months or so after I reported, there was what's called the arraignment, where the person could plead guilty or not guilty. And then it was, for me, maybe another 10 months or so after that the trial occurred. And I actually realized that I'm very lucky for the trial to have occurred 2 years after I first started reporting it to the police. It was more than 2 years, but still, it was, if I was to round it one way or the other, I would be rounding it down to 2 years. So I was really lucky, because it can take longer than that, because they set a trial date, but you don't know until that actual day as to whether the trial will go ahead, because there needs to be definitely a courtroom, and there needs to be a judge, and then all of the jury needs to be selected and available, and nobody must have COVID, or at least that's the way that it was then. And all of these factors come into play.
And then during that period, there was also lockdowns and shutdowns of courts that didn't happen through COVID and things. So that then caused a big backlog, didn't it, within the system? So 2 years might seem like a very long time, but 2 years is actually very short in a court system process.
Yeah, that's right. Very, very short. So I was very lucky to have it actually go ahead on that day. And I can only just feel for those people who get to that point of it being that day and then find that it's then going to be adjourned or postponed. And if that had been the case for me, it probably would have been another year down the track before it could have even gone to trial.
So there's so many moving parts. Just first making the decision to tell somebody and go to the police triggers another whole process to unfold that, like you said, you've got to hand over trust to somebody else.
Yeah.
You have so much uncertainty and no sense of control. So there's a lot of things that you think, oh, not sounding so good, all these emotions and all this lack of control. However, you had faith that you told the truth, you knew your story, and it was up to whoever to do their
Mm.
work to follow through the process and get to the point where you're at now.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So what happened then? So when was the court case?
So it's been a while now. When I say a while, about, yeah, it's been over a year now
Mm-hmm.
at the time of recording this. Yeah, it's been over a year. And the person was found guilty, which I still think is absolutely amazing, given that
Oh,
it was from such a long time ago. And
amazing, brilliant,
yeah,
because you had the courage to speak up and put an
yeah,
end to that.
yeah, yeah.
Amazing.
Mm. And then it's been a very long process to get through to the end of this, because sentencing was adjourned on several occasions. Actually, it was scheduled on quite a number of occasions, but adjourned for factors outside of anybody's control, really. So, but it eventually did happen, and the sentencing did occur. And so the whole legal process is now over and done with, and I can put all of that behind me.
So for you, Jen, when you say you can put it behind you, when
Mhm.
you look back at the various stages of the process for you, how's it feel for you knowing that that's done? You've had your say, it's gone through, the outcomes happened, and now where are you at with your life as far as that goes?
Well, first of all, I feel like I have honored the pain of the younger versions of myself. And as though I could reach back in time and say, I am here for you, and I was here for you, and you weren't left alone. You may have felt like you were alone,
Mm.
but you actually weren't left alone, because I've never forgotten. And the older version of me is there to honor the younger version of me. And I feel like I have done that in a way, but it's not over though, because I feel like I have, and I've never come up with the right word. It's not responsibility, it's not obligation, it's not, I don't know what it is, but there is something in me that's like, well, what can I now do to try and prevent that from ever happening to anybody else? So I've heard it, the parents of Daniel Morecambe, the boy who was abducted and murdered in the Sunshine Coast.
Mhm.
His parents, Bruce and Denise Morecambe, have said, don't waste the
Amazing,
pain.
amazing people. They are
Yeah,
just
very amazing people.
phenomenal
Yeah,
people. So
yeah.
what was their big message?
Well, they say don't waste the pain. And so I feel like that as well. Having gone through all of that pain, let's do something with that now. And that doing something with it is about trying to prevent that from occurring to others, and trying to support those and alleviate the suffering of those who've also experienced it. And this is something that I've felt, and there's that word that I haven't got it pinpointed yet, the
Mm.
need to do, or the desire to do, or the wish to do, or all of any of those things for some time now. And that's what I'm working on. So I did start this Wisdom of Survivors project, and in fact I started that even before the whole legal process. It was as I was working on this project, it became more and more clear to me that no, my story isn't finished yet. And so when I started the legal process, I closed down that project, because I didn't want to do anything at all that would interfere with the whole legal process and the investigation. But this is a project that is about seeking the wisdom of those who have experienced sexual violence but traveled a long way in their journey of recovery, so that they can provide hope and compassion, like that sense of hope for people who have perhaps more recently experienced it, or even if it's not recently, they're still struggling inside with the experience that they suffered. And so I have my wish to continue. I'm picking this up again. I don't know exactly how this is going to turn out. It's still quite new and fresh for me, because the legal process is only just very recently finished. So I need to just really see how this is going to work out now. But my desire is for it to be a book that people could find support in for them, and a podcast as well, where people could
Fabulous.
hear the stories of those who are willing to share their wisdom about what they did to support their journey to recovery.
And I don't think we can ever learn enough. Like, if people are willing to go through such awful things and share their experiences and their wisdom, like you said, wisdom of survivors, then we need to listen.
Yeah,
It's such a powerful way to get your message out. And I think in the process, help the people who are in the book or sharing their story or on your podcast to help them heal even more, because paying it forward, I think, is a really huge part of our growth
mm.
and our healing and our recovery after we've been through some sort of trauma.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. That's right. And I want to be conscious of my words as well, because I don't want to make it sound as though people are healed. Like when I say journey to recovery, that they're now recovered, and I've put that in air quotes. I
Mm-hmm.
don't mean that. And for some people, because we're all likely to be continuing to face it in one way or another as the years go on, no matter how many years it has been. And in fact, after I gave the TEDx talk last week, a woman in the audience said to me, I'm nearly 80 and I haven't forgotten, and I will never forget the experiences that she had, the sexual violence that she experienced when she was a child. And I'm also aware as well that some people don't see it as a journey. For them, it's something that happened and that's the end. That's all they're going to do to think about. And that's also fine. There's all different ways of looking at this. So I really want the people listening to know that I'm trying to be very careful with my words and to be as inclusive as possible.
Because there's not one size fits all, and everyone
Mm.
is on their own journey or
Yeah.
finish their own journey because that's where they want to leave it. And like you said, that's perfectly okay. And I think we need to honor that in each and every person, that it's an individual process.
Yeah.
And I love how you've put that. So, do you think, looking at all the amazing things you've done as a result of the awful things that have happened for you, and the capacity to go to court, to stand up, to have that voice and move forward, and then to be, I know you spoke, I know you mentioned Daniel Morecambe. I know you were a keynote speaker this year in the Day for Daniel. Did you want to share a little bit about that? And we can put links in the show notes about that, where people can hear that amazing speech that you did there, but also reach out to help support the Day for Daniel, because I know it's happening every year and they're doing some amazing stuff.
Yeah, that's right. They do amazing things. So there's the Day for Daniel. This particular event was called Dance for Daniel. So it was their annual fundraising gala ball that they have at Brisbane City Hall. That's on a different day and a different event to the Day for Daniel. So yes, they invited me to be their guest impact speaker this year, which was an immense honor, privilege to be a real. Oh, I just felt so strongly the responsibility that I had to give a talk that could help and support them with their efforts as much as I possibly could. And at the same time, to do what I could to help end the silence and to support the people there in the audience and anyone who might watch it later with their recovery. So I put so much work into that. And the whole event went really well. It was an absolute actual joy to be there. It was great to be amongst people who were so passionate about helping people, particularly to preventing violence against children.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that, and I do really ask people listening to your podcast to support the Daniel Morecambe Foundation in whatever way they can, because they're doing such incredibly great work across the country, not just in Queensland where they're based, but across the country.
Oh, everywhere. Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely around the country. And I saw them on being interviewed again just the other day. they're relentless in the work and the effort that they put in, and they really are making
Yeah.
huge inroads and a big difference. But we can't rest on our laurels. We need to continue to do that.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
That's right. That's right.
and I know, Jen, you've mentioned that you did the TEDx talk on the weekend. So did you want to share a little bit about that as well?
Yeah, sure. So that was about ending the silence about sexual violence. And in that talk, I was not asking anything more of people who had experienced sexual violence. They've got enough that they've been dealing with. My ask was for everybody else to support so that we could end the silence. And there are different ways in which I was asking, but really this is about people having conversations, being willing to step into the discomfort of talking about a topic like this, being aware, first of all, of whether our discomfort is stopping us from having the conversations, and being willing to step into that discomfort and having a conversation. And even if each of us just have one conversation about sexual violence, that's going to have an impact and a ripple effect. And then I was just saying, imagine if everyone in our country did the same. Because with over 20 million conversations, this will move the topic out of the shadows and into the light. And what's in the light can no longer be hidden. And that's what we want. We want to prevent sexual violence from occurring. And if we can each have a conversation about this, that might then pave the way for others to speak up and receive the support that they deserve, or it might help to prevent, which, and yeah, that's the important, it's all important, but if we can prevent it from occurring in the first place, that's absolutely critical. So the talk will be online. I don't know exactly how long it will take, but yes, I'll definitely get that link to you.
That would be
Yeah.
great. We'll definitely put that in the show notes. And honestly, I'm in awe of you, your courage, and your amazing commitment to breaking the silence and really getting people to have these conversations. You honestly are amazing, and it is such an honor to know you
Oh,
and to
thank
have
you,
met
Nat.
you.
Thank you. That means so much to me. I really appreciate it. And thank you for being willing to talk about this on your podcast as well. I know it's a challenging topic in all sorts of different ways, and quite often people want to not talk about this and talk about other things instead. So thank you for being
Needs
willing
to be
to talk
heard.
about this.
Oh, I'm just so grateful because yeah, we need to stop it. It's getting worse and worse. The violence against women in particular every single day. There's every
Yeah.
week there's someone dying and terrible things all the time. So if
Mm.
you were to give us a couple of tips to finish up, are there any specific qualities or personal attributes that you see as being key for moving from trauma into post traumatic growth?
Mm. Self-kindness to the degree that we can. And I
Mm,
know for some people that in itself is a bit of a big ask. And I completely get that. If we could move the dial just, a +1, if we are currently 2 out of 100 on self-kindness, can we move the dial +1 so that we're 3 out of 100? And then maybe it can go 4 and 5.
mm,
So I don't know that I've necessarily been great with that for myself for so many years,
yeah.
but I did have an experience where I actually stopped and allowed myself to forgive myself for all of the intense self-criticism that I was throwing my way, and to bring in a quality of acceptance of being myself exactly as I am, not the person who I would hope myself to be. And that was actually quite a turning point for me. And I remember that very clearly. And that went on over a period of time. But that forgiveness and acceptance was a quality of self-kindness.
Mm. What a beautiful gift to be
Yeah.
able to recognize that firstly, but then engage in starting that process. Just
Mm,
be a little bit kinder. Like you said, +1
yeah.
self kindness, because we are often our own worst critics, and particularly after we've been through trauma.
Yes. Yeah, that's right. That's right.
Yeah. So anything else that you would think? So definitely self-kindness.
And connection with people in whatever form that might take, whether that's connection with a trusted therapist or counselor, whether it's connection with your best friend, if it's connection with your dog who loves you no matter what. It might actually be connection with nature. It might be just immersing yourself in, well, I guess I'm really very much speaking from my own experience, but when I immerse myself in my bushwalk so that I've got a tree that I can touch or I can just feel the breeze, that sort of thing, that's a form of connection as well. For
Yes.
me, all of that is very healing and grounding and helps me to feel a bit more resourced inside for the things that I've got to face coming up.
Because as we know, there will always be hard things. That's life. There will be ups and downs. And as we go through that journey of life, we're going to experience that. So having something specific like that to connect within yourself and outside yourself. And you certainly have some amazing bush in the Blue Mountains. So plenty
Yeah,
of walks and areas to go to there. I
yeah,
like that.
yeah. I'm very lucky. I've got one right on my doorstep. I call it the doorstep walk.
Oh, beautiful. So, as we move to wrapping up this conversation, where can our listeners find out more about you and find you online?
Mm. I've got my Jenny Steadman website. So that's Jenny with a Y, Jenny. Steadman is Steadman
Hmm.
.com.au. So that's a good place to find me.
Yep.
I've got my Wisdom of Survivors website. That's wisdomofsurvivors.com. No AU at the end of that, just .com. And I'm very active on LinkedIn as well because I run a business. And so I put a lot of things out on LinkedIn as well.
Excellent. So, we'll put all of those links in the show notes. And as I said, when the TEDx talk becomes available, you'll send that to me and I'll definitely put that link in. I'm really looking forward to watching that. And I'll put the link from your keynote speech with the Daniel Morcombe Foundation as well, because that was a very powerful thing. And I think our listeners and their friends and family will really benefit from that because, as you said, it's time for us to really break the silence on sexual violence.
Yeah. Thank you, Nat. I appreciate everything that you're doing and for your support as well.
No problem. So, thank you so much, Jen, for coming on today. And it's been an absolute privilege and an honour to connect with you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye for now. Thank you for joining me in this episode of Growing Tall Poppies. It is my deepest hope that today's episode may have inspired and empowered you to step fully into your post-traumatic growth so that you can have absolute clarity around who you are, what matters the most to you, and to assist you to release your negative emotions and regulate your nervous system so you can fully thrive. New episodes are published every Tuesday, and I hope you'll continue to join us as we explore both the strategies and the personal qualities required to fully live a life of post-traumatic growth and to thrive. So if it feels aligned to you and really resonates, then I invite you to hit subscribe, and it would mean the world to us if you could share this episode with others who you feel may benefit too. You may also find me on Instagram at Growing Tall Poppies and Facebook, Dr. Natalie Green. Remember, every moment is an opportunity to look for the lessons and to learn and increase your ability to live the life you desire and deserve. So for now, stay connected, stay inspired, stand tall like the tall poppy you are, and keep shining your light brightly in the world. Bye for now.